As Matt said, I've been working in Trove for the last 8 years. I've been at the National Library since 2006, and just a bit of background, I'm both a humanities graduate and a library graduate. So I completed a Bachelor of Arts in History and also a Master in Library Science.
Woo!
So, what do I do in Trove? It sounds like a very fancy title, but my job is taking data from our contributing organisations and manipulating it, putting it into the formats that Trove understands. So 90% of that is putting data into Dublin Core, or Trove's interpretation of Dublin Core is a better description because we don't follow the standard exactly. But a very small percentage is mapping into EAC CPF, which is a format to describe people's corporate bodies and families. So what I'll be talking about today is looking at a couple of case studies of collections we've recently brought into Trove within the last 18 months, where it's not just the collection that we've brought in, but they're collections which have been created through researchers using Trove to create the collection in the first place. So now, because my role is primarily with data, I can talk about technical aspects for hours, but I'm not going to. So what is Trove? Trove is an aggregator, Trove is a host, Trove is a platform, and Trove is a community. How does all of this work? Well, the aggregator, it's quite simple. We take data from anyone who's willing to give us the data. And as Matt said, we've got museums in there, we've got ABC Radio National. We have a lot of library data, but a lot of that's due to our link with Libraries Australia. But we're trying to get data from the entire GLAM sector in there. And when we go into the case studies I'm looking at, you can see why we want to get that data in. As a host, well, National Library has a lot of digitised content, and that is all now hosted through Trove. Historically, the National Library has run multiple different systems to do different things for different types of data. Trove is where we end up when we try and go, no, let's just manage one system rather than managing 7, 8, 9, 15 different systems. As a platform, we've got the search side of it, the user interface side of it, but Trove also provides an API where people can extract the data back from Trove and use it in their own tools and develop their own interpretations of that data. And finally, as a community, not only do we have the community of organisations who are our content partners, but we also have the communities of users who do things like correct the text in our digitised newspapers zone, as well as the communities of digital humanities scholars who are making use of Trove to pull that data that they need for their research. So I will be talking about a couple of projects in particular. These, as I said earlier, these were ones where they pulled data out of Trove and then fed it back in. My role in these projects was primarily as expert advice for the staff members in Trove who were doing the re-ingest of the data. So that's where my interaction with these projects began and ended. So please don't ask me any specific questions because I might not be able to answer them. First case study is Heritage in the Limelight. Heritage in the Limelight is a collection of lantern slides which has been created by taking lantern slide records out of Trove, re-ingesting them into a new system which is just lantern slides and building up stories around those lantern slides and how they were used. So one way that these can be used is starting with a newspaper article. It's talking about a lecture of lantern slides given by an organisation trying to raise funds to send goods over to soldiers in the First World War. So we can see from the newspapers, there's a story about the actual lecture, an advertisement in the newspapers for the lecture saying, yes, this is happening, please come along. And then we can actually, someone's gone and done the research and gone, well, this is a lantern slide. This particular lantern slide mentions soldiers in the snow, which is this one. And if we continue looking, we can see that within the story that we originally brought up, there is a mention of this particular lantern slide, or a lantern slide very similar, giving us both context for the lantern slide itself, which would then allow the organisation who owns the lantern slide to potentially improve their record, but it also allows for the users, the people doing research, to build a story and go, now we know more about what was happening at the time and what was going on. So this just keeps going through, and so that's the Heritage in the Limelight collection, which is quite interesting in the way that they have taken the Trove data and developed it to create a new collection similar to what Honey does in terms of people creating collections from what is already there. But within Trove, it also allows people to go and discover one of them by chance and then build a story around what they're doing. The next one that I'll be talking about is the Australian Newspapers Fiction Database. I had a bit more involvement with this because the mapping of data was a lot more complicated. Magic Lantern, or Heritage in the Limelight, is stored in an eHive, which is a lovely system to work with if you're trying to get data out of it. I'm not sure about the other side. But the Australian Newspapers Fiction Database was built by a scholar looking specifically at serial fiction in Australian newspapers, primarily looking at 19th century newspapers. So she's gone through and found all 21,000 different stories which were published in the newspapers of the time and created database entries for them. Within those database entries, she's gone and linked all the chapters for those particular stories. So part of the reason for this research was to find out what people were reading back in the 19th century. And in the course of the research, she discovered that quite a number of previously unpublished or previously unknown stories by Australian authors, previous stories that no one had ever actually realised were actually published in Australia at the time, and in some cases the first publication of a story recorded anywhere in the world. So there's this type of research which can be done by using the API to pull the data into here, and then what we've done is gone and pulled the data back in. So rather than having a newspaper page, so we found a story, we love the story, where's the next one? Where do we get to the next section? You've got to manually go through and go, well, this was published here, was the story published in parts every day, or was it only published on Saturdays or whatever other day of the week you choose? And then was it always published on the same page, or was it on a different page? Now in Trove, we've got a record for just that story, and you can click on all the links and get to each individual instalment of the story, and that saves anyone who's trying to do that research the drudgery of going, okay, is it on this page? No. What about this one? No. And if anyone's ever tried to find serial fiction in Australian newspapers, it is a nightmare. And quite honestly, having done it myself, I don't think that... I think something like this is going to make life a lot easier for anyone who has that area of interest. What I'd actually like to see is someone do it for the poetry as well, but that's a different story. So So, Trove is about bringing collections together. We get local history photographs. We get objects. We get archival material, maps, biographies, digitised newspapers, and radio broadcast transcripts and podcasts. I'd love to be able to put more of those in, but there's a limit on how much we can actually do with our resources. So Radio National is our favourite one at the moment because they have nice metadata on their pages. As I said, I like data. So what we do is we bring these collections together to provide people with that place of discovery where you don't have to go, do I need to look at this local library's website to find that photograph? Or, okay, I found that photograph now, where do I need to go to find the story about the provenance of that photograph? Or in some cases it's, okay, I found this photograph of this person, they put the search into Trove, come up with a radio broadcast about that person. These are the types of things which, yes, you can put it into Google, but as I'm sure we're all aware of, sometimes filtering through the results in Google, especially when you're searching for common names, makes life interesting. And I will say that for myself, my grandfather is one of those common names which, even in Trove, it's hard enough to find any information about. There's just too many of them. So we bring the data together, and the process for bringing data into Trove, this is what we do. So we harvest data. We iterate through harvesting the data to get it to where we need it to go. We test it. We iterate the testing. It's all about getting the data into a format that people can use to make the discoveries that they need, that they wish to make. Sometimes those discoveries are not well received. There have been a few people who have contacted us regarding the fact that their grandfather couldn't possibly have done this because, like it says in the newspapers, but unfortunately the newspapers are there. Typically we seem to get a lot of people talking about their grandfathers or grandparents or great aunts or something being axe murderers. I don't know why that is. Probably because it sticks in the memory. That said, we have also had someone contact us from the newspapers saying, now I understand why my father was like he was. He was very strict, anti-violence, all of this. She discovered that he'd been spent a few months in prison for assault when he was younger. So to her, everything made a lot more sense. So for us, Trove is about bringing collections and researchers together, making the collections available through a nice, simple, single source of entry, which to everyone who's ever tried to work with data from disparate sources understands is very, very useful.